In the great silent theater of the West, the loudest truths are not shouted, but are drawn in the dust and carried on the wind for all to see. The endless prairie stretched out under a burning sun, its tranquility broken by a single desperate figure. Adele ran. She did not feel the sharp stones under her bare feet, or the thorny branches that tore at her simple dress. Her lungs were on fire, and her mind swam with exhaustion and terror, but she kept running, propelled by the memory of the judge's cold eyes. Every rustle of the tall grass sounded like the footsteps of her pursuers, every gust of wind their breath upon her neck. Finally, her strength gave out. The world tilted and faded into blackness as she collapsed onto the sun-baked earth, a small, broken shape in the vast, unforgiving landscape. She was utterly alone, her silent scream swallowed by the immense sky. Enope moved with the practiced silence of a Pawnee scout, his eyes scanning the horizon. It was then that he saw her, a smudge of faded blue against the brown and gold of the plains. He approached with caution, his hand resting lightly on the bough slung across his back. He knelt beside the still form, taking in the tattered dress, the bruised feet, and the raw exhaustion etched onto her pale face. His gaze then fell upon the crude, fresh scar that marred the delicate skin of her throat. It was not the mark of an accident. It was the deliberate work of a cruel hand. He knew then that she was not a threat, but a survivor, someone who had escaped an unspeakable darkness. He felt a surge of unexpected protectiveness for this stranger. Gently, Enope lifted a water skin to her lips, letting a few drops moisten her cracked mouth. Her eyelids fluttered, but she did not wake. He knew he could not leave her here to perish under the relentless sun or fall prey to predators. Making his decision, he carefully gathered her into his arms. She was startlingly light, as if the terror she had endured had hollowed her out, leaving only a fragile shell. He began the slow, steady walk back toward his village, his steps sure and measured. With each step, he felt a growing resolve to shield her from whatever horrors had sent her fleeing into the wilderness. He carried not just a woman, but a profound and troubling mystery. As Enope entered the circle of hide lodges, his arrival with the unconscious woman caused a stir. Curious and suspicious eyes followed him. Some murmured about the folly of bringing a stranger, a white woman, into their midst. He ignored them, his focus solely on his fragile burden. He carried her to the lodge of the shaman, a quiet place filled with the scent of dried herbs and wood smoke. He laid her down gently on a soft buffalo robe. The shaman, an old woman with eyes that held the wisdom of many seasons, began to tend to Adele's injuries without a word. Enope stood watch, a silent guardian, waiting for her to return from the dark abyss into which she had fallen. Only weeks before, Adele's life had been one of quiet servitude within the opulent mansion of Judge Garrison. The town saw him as a pillar of justice, a man of sophistication and charm. But Adele, who moved through the silent halls of his home, knew the truth. She felt the chill that clung to the fine furniture and polished silver. It was the coldness of a man who possessed no warmth, a man whose smile never reached his calculating eyes. His home was not a sanctuary of law and order, but a carefully constructed facade, a gilded cage where a terrible darkness resided just beneath the surface. Adele performed her duties with a quiet dread, always sensing the predator that lurked behind the gentleman's mask. One evening, the oppressive silence of the mansion was shattered by raised voices emanating from the judge's private study. Adele, polishing silver in the grand hallway, froze. She recognized the second voice as that of Mr. Thompson, a cattle baron who had publicly challenged the judge's latest land ruling. The argument escalated, filled with accusations and threats. Then, there was a sudden, sickening thud, followed by a profound and absolute silence. The silence was more terrifying than the shouting had been. Rooted to the spot by fear, Adele could not bring herself to move, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had a dreadful feeling that she had just become a witness to something terrible. Against her better judgment, a morbid curiosity compelled Adele to creep toward the study door, which was slightly ajar. The sight that met her eyes would be seared into her memory forever. Judge Garrison stood calmly over the crumpled form of Mr. Thompson. A heavy crystal decanter lay near the body, its sharp edges stained with a dark liquid. With a chilling composure, the judge bent down and began to roll the lifeless body into a priceless Persian rug. There was no panic in his movements, only a cold, methodical efficiency. He was not a man who had lost control in a moment of passion. He was a monster concealing his crime with the same ease with which he donned his judicial robes. As Adele backed away, her mind screaming for her to run, a loose floorboard betrayed her with a loud creak. The sound echoed in the silent hall like a gunshot. Judge Garrison's head snapped up, and his cold, gray eyes locked onto hers. The work of a moment became an eternity. He did not shout or curse. He did not even move. He simply smiled. It was a slow, terrible smile that held no humor, only the grim promise of a final judgment. In that instant, Adele understood that she had seen too much. Her life, as she knew it, was over. She was no longer a servant in his house. She was a loose end that the judge, in his own time, would be sure to tie. Judge Garrison was a patient man. He waited for the perfect moment, which arrived with the annual town festival. The streets of Redemption were alive with music, laughter, and the sounds of celebration, a perfect cover for a dark deed. While the townsfolk were distracted by parades and pie-eating contests, a different kind of drama was set to unfold within the judge's stately mansion. The pervasive noise from outside ensured that no one would hear a thing, creating an island of menacing silence where the judge could act with impunity. For Adele, the sounds of joy from the town square were a mocking counterpoint to the silent, suffocating fear that had become her constant companion. That evening, the judge approached Adele with an uncharacteristic display of concern. "You look unwell, my dear," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "The heat has been oppressive. You must hydrate yourself." He handed her a glass of cool water. Her hand trembled as she took it. To refuse would be to confirm her fear and suspicion, a dangerous act in itself. Forced to drink under his watchful gaze, she drained the glass. A strange, heavy drowsiness soon began to cloud her senses. The room started to spin, the judge's smiling face dissolving into a blurry haze. Her last conscious thought was one of utter terror as she felt herself slipping into a deep, unnatural sleep. Adele awoke to darkness and the musty smell of dust and decay. A sharp, searing pain throbbed in her throat, and a foul, metallic taste filled her mouth. She was lying on a thin mattress on the floor of the mansion's attic. Confusion warred with a rising panic. She tried to call out, to scream for help, but no sound came forth. Only a hoarse, desperate rasp escaped her lungs. She tried again, her entire body convulsing with the effort, but there was nothing. The connection between her mind and her voice had been severed. A wave of cold horror washed over her as she reached for her neck, her fingers searching for the source of the pain. Her trembling fingers found it. A line of rough new stitches just below her jawline. The discovery sent a jolt of pure, undiluted terror through her. She understood now. He had not taken her life, but he had stolen her voice. He had found the most cruel and permanent way to ensure her silence. She was alive, but she was buried, trapped in the attic, unable to speak, unable to tell anyone what she had seen. She was a ghost in her own life, a silent witness to a crime she could no longer name. The judge had made her a prisoner in his house, and within the confines of her own soundless body, a fate worse than any she could have imagined. The attic became Adele's world, a world of shadows, silence, and suffocating dust. Days bled into one another, marked only by the slivers of light that crept through the cracks in the roof. Her only visitor was the judge. He would bring her a tray of meager food and water, setting it down just inside the door. He never spoke, but he did not need to. His smug, triumphant gaze said everything. He reveled in her powerlessness, enjoying the spectacle of her silent despair. Each visit was a fresh torment, a reminder of her complete and utter helplessness. Her spirit began to wither in the suffocating silence, hope dwindling to a faint, barely glowing ember. Just as that ember was about to die, a small act of kindness rekindled it. Mary, a younger maid who had always been timid and fearful of the judge, began to leave extra morsels of food and a fuller canteen of water outside the attic door when she thought no one was looking. She never spoke to Adele, and Adele could not speak back, but a silent understanding passed between them. Mary's fear of the judge was palpable, yet her compassion was stronger. For Adele, these small offerings were more than just sustenance. They were a lifeline, a fragile thread connecting her back to a world of humanity she thought she had lost forever. Mary's kindness gave Adele the strength to fight. She began to explore her prison, her fingers probing every floorboard, every wall. One night, her search was rewarded. She discovered a loose board near the far wall. Prying it up, she found a dark, narrow space between the walls of the mansion. It was a daunting, cobweb-filled passage, but it was a potential path to freedom. Night after agonizing night, she squeezed into the crawl space, moving slowly and silently through the guts of the house. She navigated by the faint moonlight that filtered through the outer walls, her heart pounding with a mixture of terror and a wild, resurgent hope. Her chance came during a violent thunderstorm. The wind howled and rain lashed against the house, the thunder loud enough to mask any sound she might make. She knew it was now or never. As if guided by fate, she found the side door to the kitchens unlocked. Mary. It had to be Mary's doing. Without a moment's hesitation, Adele slipped out into the raging storm. The cold rain was a shock, but it felt like a baptism, washing away the dust and despair of her prison. She did not have a plan. She had no destination. She only knew she had to run, to put as much distance as possible between herself and the monster in the mansion. Back in the present, Adele slowly regained consciousness in the quiet calm of the Pawnee Lodge. A shaman gently applied a soothing poultice of crushed yarrow and juniper to her cuts and bruises. Across the lodge, the tribe's elder, a man named Wise Otter, watched her with an unreadable expression. His face was a mask of weathered patience, his eyes holding a deep wisdom that seemed to penetrate her very soul. He did not speak, but she felt the weight of his scrutiny. She was an outsider, a potential source of trouble, and she knew her fate rested in the hands of this stoic, silent leader who was now weighing her worth and her truthfulness. Enepe stood before the elder, speaking in the low, rhythmic tones of the Pawnee language. He argued on Adele's behalf, his voice filled with a conviction that surprised even himself. "I see no deceit in her eyes," Enepe said, his gaze steady. "I see only a great sorrow and a spirit that has been deeply wounded but not broken." Wise Otter listened intently, his gaze shifting from Enepe to the fragile woman on the buffalo robe. Some of the other warriors murmured their dissent, wary of the conflicts that so often followed in the wake of the white settlers. But Wise Otter, after a long silence, gave a slow nod. "She may stay," he decreed. "The Pawnee do not turn away those who suffer." In the days that followed, Enepe became Adele's bridge to this new world. Seeing her struggle to communicate, the frustration and fear in her eyes, he had an idea. He returned one afternoon with several smooth, pale pieces of birch bark and a stick of charcoal from a cold fire. He set them before her, his expression gentle and encouraging. At first, she stared at them, confused. Then, a flicker of understanding dawned. Her hands trembled as she took the charcoal. With hesitant, shaky lines, she began to draw. The first image that took shape on the stark white bark was a face, the handsome, cruel face of Judge Garrison. Once she started, she could not stop. The images poured out of her, a torrent of silent testimony. She drew the judge's study in meticulous detail, the grand desk, the leather-bound books. She drew the body of Mr. Thompson, wrapped in the ornate Persian rug. Enepe sat with her for hours, watching in rapt silence as her story unfolded on the pieces of bark. He saw the horror of the crime, the terror of the witness, and the cold evil of the perpetrator. The pity he had first felt for the woman he had found on the prairie was slowly being replaced by a grim, hardening anger and a profound respect for her unbreakable will to survive. Enepe became a student of Adele's silent language. He learned to read the subtle shifts in her expression, the tension in her hands as she drew, and the stories that swam in the depths of her expressive eyes. He brought her different pigments to use, ground from colored clays and berries, allowing her to add shades of emotion to her stark charcoal drawings. He saw past the victim and began to see the woman, intelligent, observant, and possessing a core of strength that defied the terrible things that had been done to her. A bond formed between them, a connection woven from shared moments of quiet understanding, transcending the need for spoken words. She filled piece after piece of bark with the narrative of her ordeal. She drew the dusty attic, a small, square prison of shadows. She depicted the judge's taunting visits, his form a dark silhouette in the doorway. Drawing these memories was an agony, and Ina Pei could see the toll it took on her. He would often place a reassuring hand on her shoulder, a simple gesture of support that gave her the strength to continue. He was no longer just her rescuer. He had become her confidant, the sole keeper of a story that the world was never meant to hear, and his admiration for her grew with every line she drew. One afternoon she gathered her courage to draw the most difficult memory of all. Her hand shook violently as she sketched a hazy, nightmarish scene. Through a distorted, dreamlike haze, she drew the face of a man with spectacles and a thin mustache, a face she vaguely recalled as belonging to the town's physician, Dr. Miles. She drew the terrifying glint of polished metal instruments in his hand. It was then that Ina Pei fully understood the meaning of the scar on her throat. A cold rage settled in his heart. It was not just murder, it was a conspiracy, a chillingly calculated act of brutality designed to silence an innocent. Word of the drawing woman spread through the village. The initial suspicion of the Pawnee people slowly transformed into a shared sense of respect and indignation. They saw Adele not as a weak and helpless outsider, but as a courageous storyteller, a woman who wielded charcoal and bark as a warrior wields a bow. Ina Pei looked at the growing collection of drawings, no longer seeing them as just a tragic story. He saw them for what they were, a detailed account, a testimony, and a weapon. A weapon powerful enough to bring down not just a corrupt judge, but the entire web of deceit he had spun around the town. Ina Pei spent an entire day studying the drawing Adele had made of the judge's mansion. Her memory was flawless. Every window, door, and veranda was rendered with perfect accuracy. He traced the lines of the building with his finger, searching for a weakness, an unguarded entry. And then he found it. On the side of the house, partially obscured by overgrown rose bushes, she had drawn a small, barred window, set low in the stone foundation. It was a basement window, likely for ventilation, and it was the one place that seemed overlooked, a subtle flaw in the fortress of a powerful and arrogant man. This, he knew, was their only way in. He took the drawings to Wise Otter, spreading them out on the floor of the Elder's Lodge. He explained Adele's story, pointing to the images that depicted the crime and the subsequent conspiracy. He then showed the Elder the map of the mansion, indicating the basement window. The object used in the crime, the glass decanter, is likely still hidden inside the house, Ina Pei explained. Wise Otter's expression was grave. This is a dangerous path, Ina Pei. The judge's influence is like a poison that has seeped deep into the soil of that town. Even the soldiers at the fort listen to his words. Justice is a path that is often dangerous, Ina Pei replied, his voice low but firm. This woman has suffered greatly. We have given her shelter, but we cannot give her back what was stolen. We can, however, help her find justice. To do nothing is to let this evil continue to cast its long shadow. Wise Otter studied the young warrior's face, seeing the fire of conviction in his eyes. He then looked over at Adele's drawings, at the silent, powerful story they told. After a long moment, he nodded slowly. Your heart is true, Ina Pei. Your path is clear. Go with my blessing. But move like the shadow, for you will be hunting a great and cunning beast. With the Elder's blessing secured, they began to plan. Adele created one final, crucial drawing. On a large, smooth piece of hide, she drew a detailed layout of the mansion's ground floor. She painstakingly marked the route from the basement stairs to the study, even indicating which floorboards were likely to creak. Then, she drew a dark X on the Persian rug in the center of the study. Pointing to it, she then drew a small, strong box, a safe, hidden beneath the floor. She looked at Ina Pei, her eyes conveying the immense risk, but also her complete trust in him. He was her champion, her only hope for retribution. The night of the new moon was a shroud of perfect blackness. Ina Pei prepared himself, darkening his skin with a mixture of charcoal and river mud until he was one with the shadows. He carried no weapons save for a small utility tool made of sharpened bone and a leather cord. Weapons would make noise and be of little use in a mission that depended entirely on stealth. He moved out of the village like a departing spirit, his moccasins making no sound on the dry earth. He ran with an easy, ground-eating lope, the miles falling away behind him as he headed toward the distant sleeping town of Redemption, a place of deep injustice. He reached the outskirts of the judge's estate just before the deepest point of the night. The grand mansion was a dark, hulking shape against the starless sky, its windows like vacant eyes. He found the basement window, just as Adele had drawn it, concealed behind the thorny grasp of the rose bushes. With patient effort, he used his bone tool to pry away the crumbling mortar around the iron bars. The work was slow and arduous, his muscles straining with the effort. Finally, one of the bars came loose. The opening was barely wide enough, but with a quiet exhale, he squeezed his lean frame through, dropping silently into the damp, musty darkness of the basement. Inside the house, the silence was a living thing. Every creak of the old building seemed amplified. Every tick of the grandfather clock in the hall, a hammer blow against the stillness. Using the map seared into his memory, Inepe navigated the labyrinth of the mansion's ground floor. He moved with a supernatural grace, avoiding the creaking floorboards Adele had marked, his senses on high alert. He reached the study, a room steeped in the lingering scent of old paper, leather, and evil. He located the Persian rug and, rolling it back, revealed the hidden iron door of the safe set into the floorboards. Kneeling, Inepe examined the lock on the safe. It was a simple tumbler mechanism, designed more to hide things than to truly secure them from a skilled intruder. He inserted the tip of his bone tool into the keyhole, listening with intense concentration. He worked by feel and sound, patiently manipulating the tumblers. Time seemed to stand still. Finally, he heard a soft, satisfying click. Holding his breath, he lifted the heavy iron door. There, nestled inside on a bed of velvet, was a cloth-wrapped object. He carefully lifted it out. It was the crystal decanter, its surface still bearing the faint, dark stains of a long-dried crime. His mission was complete. Returning to the Pawnee village with the evidence was only the first step. Inepe knew that the town's sheriff was firmly in the judge's pocket. Going to him would be a death sentence for them both. Their only hope lay with the army at Fort Reno, an outpost of federal authority that, with luck, remained beyond the judge's corrupting reach. The next morning he and Adele set out, traveling east. They moved carefully, sticking to the ravines and lowlands, avoiding the main trails where they might be spotted. Adele, though still physically weak, was filled with a new and determined energy. Justice, after so long, finally seemed within her grasp. After a day of travel, they spotted a column of dust in the distance. It was an army patrol. Inepe concealed Adele in a cluster of rocks before stepping out onto the trail, his hands raised in a universal sign of peace. The soldiers, a dozen men in dusty blue uniforms, immediately reined in their horses, their carbines held at the ready. The officer in charge, a stern-faced lieutenant with captain's bars on his shoulders, rode forward. "State your business," the officer commanded, his voice sharp and wary. His name was Graves, and he was a man who had little patience for ambiguity. Inepe spoke calmly and clearly, explaining that he had a matter of grave importance, a matter of murder, to bring to the lieutenant's attention. Lieutenant Graves was skeptical, his expression hardened by years of dealing with frontier disputes and false claims. "Evidence," he said flatly. "I operate on evidence, not stories." Inepe nodded and signaled for Adele to come forward. She emerged from the rocks, her silent presence and the raw scar on her throat giving the lieutenant pause. She unrolled the pieces of bark and laid them on the ground. The drawings told their story with a clarity that no spoken words could match. Lieutenant Graves studied the drawings, his expression shifting from skepticism to intense interest. The visual narrative was compelling and detailed. Then, Inepe unwrapped the cloth and presented the crystal decanter. The dark stains on its ornate surface were unmistakable. Graves took the decanter, his eyes narrowing as he examined it. He looked from the decanter to the drawings, then to the silent, waiting woman. He had seen enough. This was not a simple frontier squabble. This was a calculated crime committed by a powerful man. "Sergeant," Graves barked, his voice ringing with newfound authority. "We are riding to redemption. Immediately." The column of soldiers arrived at the garrison mansion with the morning sun. They moved with swift military precision, surrounding the house before anyone inside was aware of their presence. Lieutenant Graves, with two of his largest troopers, strode up to the front door and hammered on it with his gloved fist. A startled butler opened it, and the soldiers brushed past him without ceremony. They found Judge Garrison in his lavish dining room, calmly enjoying his breakfast. He looked up, his expression one of mild annoyance, which quickly turned to disbelief as he saw the soldiers and the grim-faced lieutenant approaching his table. "Judge Harrison," Lieutenant Graves said, his voice cold as steel, "you are under arrest for the murder of Mr. Thompson." The judge's face paled, but he quickly composed himself, a sneer forming on his lips. "This is absurd. You have no authority here." For an answer, Graves slowly placed the crystal decanter on the pristine white tablecloth, right next to the judge's plate. The sight of it shattered Garrison's composure. The color drained from his face, replaced by a mask of pure shock and fury. His reign of terror, built on fear and intimidation, crumbled in an instant. The troopers took him by the arms, and the powerful judge was led away, for the first time in his life, utterly powerless. The arrest of Judge Garrison sent a tremor through the entire territory. With his power broken, people who had lived in fear for years began to speak. Stories of his corruption and cruelty, long suppressed, came to light. Dr. Miles, the town physician, was also arrested, his role in the brutal silencing of Adele revealed by other coerced witnesses. The town of Redemption began a slow and painful process of healing. Adele, the silent woman who had started it all, found that she had a new voice, a powerful one. Her drawings were sought after, her story becoming a local legend of resilience and courage in the face of absolute evil. Adele chose not to return to the world that had been so cruel to her. She found her home, her peace, and her family among the Pawnee people who had shown her such kindness. She and Lenape built a life together, their days filled with a quiet, profound understanding that needed no words. Their love was a testament to the idea that even in the harsh and unforgiving landscape of the West, hope could take root and flourish. She continued to draw, telling the stories of her new life. Her art, a vibrant and lasting legacy of the silent witness who had brought a tyrant to justice and found love in the most unexpected of places.